Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 12th of August. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. The High Court of Justice has partially rejected a motion filed by human rights organizations against the so-called infiltrator law, but it determined that leaving infiltrators in open detention facilities for 20 months is too harsh. IBA's Ellie Wogelenter has that story.
The High Court of Justice has ordered the release within 15 days of some 1,200 of the 1,700 asylum seekers being held at the open detention facility in Cholot, ruling that the 1,200 being held in the facility for a year or longer was excessive. The 9-justice panel ruled 8-1 that the maximum current period of 20 months that asylum seekers could be held in Cholot is too long. It gave the Knesset 6 months to amend the law, set a shorter maximum detention period, and temporarily limited the length of detention at Cholot to 12 months. The court was ruling on a petition against the third version of an amendment to the Prevention of Infiltration law, which allows for the detention of asylum seekers. The court previously rejected in sweeping fashion 2 previous versions of the law. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed satisfaction that the court accepted in principle the government's stance that the phenomenon of illegal infiltration by work migrants is unacceptable and infiltrators can be jailed in order to create the necessary deterrent. Hours before the ruling, Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked wrote on Facebook that the version of the law that was authorized by the Knesset last time is too soft, and the proof is that in recent months, the phenomenon of infiltration, which we had almost gotten over, has returned and dozens of Africans infiltrated Israel. And Shaked uploaded videos of the intolerable lives of South Tel Aviv residents, including one of an African woman hitting an elderly woman with a wooden board several times. Meretz chairwoman Zahava Galon said that Shaked's Facebook post proved that she cannot be justice minister because rather than defend judges in the courts from political pressure, she took advantage of her position to terrorize them through blatant political intervention that completely disrespects separations of power. The petition against the law was filed by several human rights groups. In a statement jointly released after the ruling, they said the court made clear today for the third time that legislators did not engage in enough thought and thorough discussion before ordering thousands of people to be deprived of their liberty. Other changes ruled on by the court included eliminating 2 of the 3 daily head counts. This included the noon head count, which had effectively prevented residents from leaving for the day. This was the third time in less than 2 years that the court altered elements of the law. Ellie Wogelenter, IBA News.
Turning now to the Iranian nuclear accord, and in his continuing defense, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says that if Congress fails to approve it, the United States won't be able to prevent its allies from doing business with Tehran, and that a subsequent loss of confidence in American leadership could threaten the dollar's position as the world's reserve currency. During his remarks at a media event in New York, the top U.S. diplomat went on to outline advantages of the negotiated deal, even in the face of potential Iranian violations.
We negotiated something called snapback, automatic snapback of the sanctions. We also negotiated that because we wanted to protect our interests, apart from France, Germany, and the others. We wanted to know that if the United States of America has information we're concerned about, and we want to protect our interest and our ally Israel and our allies and friends in the Gulf states, we need to be able to act for ourselves. So we specifically negotiated that one country alone can go to the Security Council and raise the issue of their noncompliance. And if after 30 days there isn't a vote in the Security Council, all the sanctions automatically snap back. Now that's pretty draconian, which is why we wrote the language, you can snap back in whole or in part. That 24 days is more than ample. And you know why that 24 days is actually an amazing accomplishment? The very reason we are in this pickle with Iran is because the IAEA was never able to close on getting access. They've been looking for years to resolve these unresolved questions. And they get stiffed, that's all. And nothing would happen. That's why we put the sanctions in place. So I sat there with my counterpart and I said, look, I'm not negotiating a deal in which you guys just continue to play rope-a-dope with us for another 5 years. We're going to do a deal in which we have to have an ending to the process of the ask for access. And if you haven't given the access, you're in material breach. That is exactly what we achieved in this agreement. It is the only agreement in the world with 189 countries party to the NPT. This is the only agreement in the world in which we have that kind of an access agreement.
Former U.S. Senator Joseph Lieberman has accepted the chairmanship of an organization dedicated to opposing the July 14th Iranian pact. The United Against Nuclear Iran group announced that the 73-year-old politician will play a key role in its efforts to educate and inform the American public about serious shortcomings of the agreement. Here now is a portion of a recent interview that Lieberman gave to Fox News.
I thought back to my 24 years in the Senate. I can't think of a vote that I cast, apart from the ones deploying American troops into combat, that was as important as this agreement will be to the future security of the United States. The amazing thing to say, which people don't talk about, is that nobody thinks that this agreement has the possibility of getting approved by Congress. In other words, it's clear that there is a majority that will reject it. The only question is, will there be 2/3 in both chambers to override a presidential veto? And
what
I
do
can
you
tell
think?
you right
What do you
now,
think of that? It's close. It might be close, but I'm told that it would need at least another 10 votes to do that.
Yeah, I think they're there. They're not there now, but they can be there. In other words, if you combine those who are clearly have said already they're going to be against it with those who have remained undecided, it's well over 2/3 in both chambers. And people are looking at it seriously. They know the importance of the vote. They know that they voted for sanctions, Congress, over the years against Republican and Democratic presidents, strong bipartisan majorities, for a single reason: that economic sanctions on Iran would only come off if Iran's nuclear weapons program ended. This agreement does the opposite. Take the sanctions off, and after a period of years, they get to be a nuclear power. I think that's the reason that there's enough votes here to reject this agreement and tell the administration, go back to the table and negotiate a better deal.
You know, John Kerry had said, Senator, I'm paraphrasing here, that, you don't like this deal, the next alternative is war. What did you make of that?
Well, that's just not right. And that's a natural debating tactic. But all of us opposed to the agreement don't want war. We want a better agreement. And we feel that the U.S. and our allies went into these negotiations in a powerful position because the Iranian economy was really suffering. But we basically conceded and conceded and conceded to the Iranians. It was as if they were dominating the negotiations. I mean, they're a second or third rate power. We're the greatest country in the world. And yet they got more from us in this negotiation and our allies than we got from them.
Joining me now in the studio to discuss the Supreme Court decision about the asylum seekers is former minister and Hebrew University law professor Shimon Shitrit. Thank you for coming in this afternoon.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So the High Court has partially rejected the petition, partially rejected the anti-infiltration law, and it also ruled against the holding of migrants past the 20 months point. Was this a fair call in your view?
Yes, we have a dialogue between the legislature and the judiciary, and I think the dialogue is now on the, we can define it as a dialogue not of equals, but a dialogue that on the judicial side, it is in fact overruling the judgment of the legislature. The question is, does the legislature have any discretion, any judgment on what are the measures to combat this universal phenomenon, actually, of immigration, not necessarily asylum seekers. Some of them are, but mainly people who want to have a better economic situation, which is legitimate, but not in this situation. And most countries have formulated measures against it. I would say that the Supreme Court, since it is the third round,
That's right.
now coming back to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court sending it down again and overruling the legislative judgment, I think it is not good neither for the Supreme Court, nor for the Israeli society, nor for the Israeli democracy. Because this means the Supreme Court is assuming too much in terms of going into details how to formulate certain measures that are recognized to be necessary
Well,
in our modern society.
We have Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked, who is mostly satisfied with this ruling, but she's still continuing her call that the court's authority be regulated so that its powers are limited. Are you in favor of that?
I am not in favor of the way that the Justice Minister is doing it, because her role as Justice Minister is to protect this position of the court, to protect the rule of law, and she should not do anything that appears like eroding the power of the court. And what she did yesterday, in continuing today, in fact, in her interviews, is in fact by the appearance of what she has done. Not on the content. It is legitimate for a politician to criticize and to say that the Supreme Court made a mistake and erred in its judgment. But the way it did it, it gave an appearance that she is not respecting sufficiently the status of the court. She did it because yesterday she announced in the posts that she put on Facebook the statements that looked like an attempt to influence the court, which was not in fact the case. The judgment was written already many days ago. But the way she did it, and for the men in the street, it is not clear when the judgment is written, when it is published, how many days passed between the writing of the judgment and the publication. And so I think she made a mistake, but on the matter of principle, it is legitimate for the Knesset to legislate and to change what the court decided. This is totally legitimate.
We're just about out of time, but I'd like to briefly ask you about the issue of administrative detention, which traditionally has been used against Palestinian terror suspects, but recently it's been used against suspected far-right Jewish extremists, so that these people are being held without trial. And of course, this is a carryover from the British mandatory era. Israel's a democracy that's been thriving for 67 years. Isn't it time to do away with these archaic rules?
The fact of the matter is that this particular arrangement is an Israeli revision of what we call the defense regulations from the British period.
Right.
This is a law that was passed in '68 to revise the defense regulation under Israeli arrangement. The difference is that every decision of the Minister of Defense must be approved by a judge of the district court. So we have here judicial approval required, and this is according to the general standards that are accepted in other countries in situations of emergency. Now, I think very, very serious sickness needs very strong remedy, very strong medicine.
Yes.
And I think, and I feel, that it is today a situation of real emergency concerning Jewish extremists, and I am in full support, in spite of the violation of certain sphere of freedom that will come
I
with
want to
this.
discuss that with you more. We'll have you back and go into that in depth. Professor Shutri, thank you as always for being with us.
Thank you.
In other news, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif, who negotiated his nation's landmark nuclear deal with world powers, is today holding talks in Lebanon. The topics under discussion include a new plan to resolve the civil war in Syria that Iranian officials say will only be revealed after talks with the government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Zarif is slated to travel to Damascus later today. Iran is Assad's strongest supporter and has been marketing itself as a key player that could help to resolve the conflict in the wake of having successfully brokered the nuclear deal. Meanwhile, diplomats from Russia and Saudi Arabia, working to come up with a joint proposal to combat the Islamic State, managed to outline a plan during yesterday's talks in Moscow, but failed to overcome disagreement over the fate of Syrian President Assad. The Kremlin is pushing for its longtime ally to be part of a coalition against ISIS, while Riyadh's foreign minister, Adel al-Jubeir, reiterated his nation's position, saying that Assad is part of the problem and not the solution to the Syrian crisis, and that there is no place for him in the future of Syria. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stressed Russia's belief that influential countries involved in ending the civil war should not make the mistake of thinking that the Assad issue can be resolved militarily. In other news, when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu lands in London next month at the start of an official state visit, he will be arrested for war crimes. Well, at least that's the desire of some 30,000 people who've signed a petition posted on the official website of the British Parliament, holding him responsible for the deaths of Palestinians during last summer's conflict with Gaza. According to directives, the government has to respond to all petitions containing more than 10,000 signatures and is required to debate the issue if that number reaches 100,000 or more. It became more difficult to obtain arrest warrants for visitors 4 years ago when British legislation was approved requiring consent from the Director of Public Prosecutions. While the law provides a layer of protection for politicians from abroad, private individuals remain vulnerable. Last June, former Minister of Defense Shaul Mofaz was nearly arrested during a trip to London. Officials at the Foreign Ministry in Jerusalem are dismissing the campaign as a meaningless publicity stunt and insist that there are no plans to change Prime Minister Netanyahu's itinerary. A controversy is brewing in Paris as a slated Israeli cultural event is turning into a political hot potato. The Tel Aviv Upon the Seine festival is set to include an artificial beach along the famed Parisian waterway, planned by supporters of Israel in hopes of bringing a little bit of the Tel Aviv atmosphere to the French capital. France 24 brings us the story.
Sun, sand and political controversy. Paris-Plage is causing a stir this year with plans to host a Tel Aviv Upon the Seine event at the artificial beach. Billed as a celebration of Israel's second largest city, organisers are hoping for a festival atmosphere with food trucks, DJs and outdoor activities. Yet the event's been harshly criticised by those who say it's an inappropriate show of support for Israeli government policy, particularly in the wake of an arson attack on a West Bank village in which a Palestinian toddler burned to death. Over 16,000 signatures have been collected in opposition to the partnership with Tel Aviv. Paris councillor Danielle Simonet of the Parti de Gauche, or the Left Party, said the event sends a very bad message, taking place a year after the massacres in the Gaza Strip by the Israeli state and army, at a time when the government's intensifying its settlement policy. She's among those calling for the event to be cancelled in its current form, suggesting it be replaced by a peace protest to fight all forms of racism, anti-Semitism and in recognition of a Palestinian state. Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo planned the event on a visit to Israel in May. The city halls brushed off any talk of cancelling it, with right-wing and centrist politicians saying criticism of Tel Aviv's involvement amounts to anti-Semitism. Local authorities have moved to reinforce security around the event amid fears of protests. 300 extra police officers will be deployed in the French capital.
Taking a look at local finance, and the shekel today lost strength against all major foreign currencies, and share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange were also down across the board. Here's a look at the afternoon numbers. The IBA weather team says that no significant change in temperatures or conditions are expected tomorrow. Here's the forecast at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow, and I'll be back to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a great evening and shalom from Jerusalem.